are at the bottom of 59a. 3 lines from the bottom. So we had this whole exposition that the verse said the verse by the Omer had this extra verse. It said mincha he, it is a flour offering. So what it is, come to exclude he lahotzi shtei halechem. It came to exclude the bread that you bring on Shavuos. Shlayitanu lo shem lo lavona. That bread on Shavuos is not going to have no oil and no frankincense. Ve'ema lahotzi minchas kohanim. And maybe it should come to exclude the voluntary offering, flour offering of a kohen. Mistabra minchas kohanim havlele rebuye. It's more logical to include the kohen in the oil and the frankincense and exclude the bread on Shavuos. Why? So once again, let's go through all the similarities and see which are more similar. So Shekain, both the offering of the Kohen and the Omer have isaron, the measurement of flour, kli in a vessel, matzah, as opposed to the bread, that's bread. The etzem is that it comes for itself and not for something else. So the Omer and the Minchas Kohen is its own offering, as opposed to no, that's later. 1 second. The aim Minchas Kohen isaron kli matzah ve'etzem. This one they come for themselves, the Omer offering and this flour offering of the Kohen, as opposed to other offerings that come with the other flour offerings. Some of them, like the libation offerings, that'll come with an animal, or and I guess the bread will come with the 2 lambs. They don't come only on their own. They come with others but these offerings, the Omer and the mincha of the Kohen, come on their own. Okay, says the Gemara, hagasha, they require bringing it to the altar, as opposed to the bread that you put on the table. The ishim, part of it goes up on the altar. So we see that the that offering, that mincha offering of the Omer is more similar to the offering of the mincha of the Kohen, the flour offering of the Kohen, and it's not similar to the bread offering brought on Shavuos. Says the Gemara, next page, Adarabba, say the opposite. Shtei halechem, the 2 breads you're going to bring on Shavuos, should be included to have oil and frankincense. Why? Shekain tzibor, the Omer offering and the bread offering is a communal offering. It's a chova, it's obligatory, as opposed to the flour offering of the Kohen. He's voluntarily bringing it. Tmiya, they're both, because their communal offerings can be brought in a state of impurity. The achal, so these get eaten, as opposed to the offering of the Kohen that gets fully consumed. Pigula, they're both have permitters, and therefore their pigul will apply to them, as opposed to the mincha of the Kohen, just the whole thing gets put up on the altar and that's it. Bishabata, they're both able to be brought on Shabbos, as opposed to the voluntary offering of the Kohen. Matir, they both come to permit something. So the Shavuos offering comes to permit the new grain, that you can use the new grain for offerings in the temple, and the Omer permits the new grain for regular humans, and the Shavuos offering permits the new grain for the temple offerings. Meaning, until you brought those offerings, we'll see this more, I think, coming up very soon. Until you brought the Omer, the second day of Pesach, you can't benefit from the new grain. You can only use the old grain. If you want to benefit from the new grain, you got to bring this offering. If you want to use the new grain for anything temple related, that you had to wait until the offerings brought, until the temple offerings, until the Shavuos offering is brought. So they both come to permit the grain as opposed to the voluntary Kohen offering. Definitely doesn't do that. Tenufa, they both are waived. Ba'aretz, they both come, the Omer and the Shtei Lechem, on Shavuos, they only can come from grain from Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to the voluntary Kohen offering, which can come even from grain outside of Israel. Bisman, they have a set time. Second day Pesach, 49 days later, voluntary Kohen offering can be brought whenever. Chadash, so Chadash, they can only be brought from the new grain, not from the old grain. So you see there are a lot of similarities. The honey nefishin, there's more similarities between the Omer offering and the two breads than there are between the Omer offering and the voluntary Kohen offering, and yet we still say that that the voluntary Kohen offering is included and the bread is excluded. Why do we do that? It says our mistabra nefesh, because when it talks about the mincha offering requiring oil and frankincense, it says the word nefesh. It sounds like it's talking, it's talking about much more on an individual. The individual sacrifice is going to need oil and frankincense as opposed to a communal sacrifice, even though there's more differences. But the verse itself seems to tell us that when it says oil and frankincense, it's really referring to a person, nefesh, a person, and not a communal offering. So the breads are excluded, like the Mishnah told us, from oil and from frankincense. Yeah? Good. Mishnah says, V'chayv al shemen pnei atzmo. Let's say you put shemen on it, you put oil on it, on an offering that you're not supposed to. So the end of the previous Mishnah told us that the bread on Shavuos, the sin offering of a Kohen or a Sota, don't get oil and don't get frankincense. What if you put it on? So v'chayiv al Hashem b'fnei atzma. If you put the oil on, you're liable. Chayiv al Hashem b'fnei atzma, v'chayiv al levona b'fnei atzma. And if you put the frankincense on, so then you're gonna be liable for that too. Now, there's gonna be a difference though. Nasan ala Hashem and pasal levona yilkatano. You put oil on, we'll see more, but oil really becomes part and parcel with the flour. You can't really separate it afterwards. Once you put oil and flour. So that's going to invalidate the offering. Frankincense, yilkatena, just scoop it back up and remove it. It's removable. So therefore, even right now that it's on the offering, it's not going to invalidate the offering because there's a way out. You can scoop it back up. Now, what if you put oil on the part of the offering that's not going to be brought up on the altar, on the shirayim, the part that's going to be consumed by the Kohen? So that we say, nasan shemen al shiareha, eino over b'lo saseh. You have not violated a negative commandment. Nasan kli al gabe kli. If you have the flour offering, you put oil in a vessel on top of it, so it's in a vessel on top of it, but not in the flour. That's also lo pas, so that's not going to invalidate it because you can just take the vessel off. Only if it's in the flour itself is it going to invalidate. Okay, so now Tana Rabbana. Lo yasim ala Hashem misam pasol. You can't put oil on these offerings, and if you do, it's going to be invalid. Yachol lo yitin la levona v'nasam pasol. You would have thought if I put frankincense on, it should also invalidate Talmud Lomar ki chatas. It's like a chatas, which tells you that that even when you put frankincense on the offering, it's still called a sin offering. It doesn't lose its name. So says Gemara, okay, so say the same thing by oil. When you put oil on it, it's also called a chatas. Why don't you say that? He. It without oil, but with oil, it won't be called a chatas anymore. Says Gemara, hold on. How did you just exclude you? How do we say this? Umara is that oil is going to. You included oil as a disqualification, and you excluded frankincense as a disqualification. How did you include one and exclude the other? Umara is lifsal b'shemer lahakshir b'levona, to invalidate oil put on this sin offering of a sin offering, and yet you validated if frankincense is there. How did you do that? Say the opposite. So the Gemara answers, Posalani b'shemen she'efshar lilakto because oil, you're not able to gather it back up. But yet I allow the lavona, the frankincense, to not, it won't invalidate the sacrifice. If you put frankincense on, it's not going to invalidate it. Why? Because you could collect it. It's collectible. So you can scoot right off the offering. You put it on, you can take it off. Why not? Why is it down? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Let's say it's before you put water on it or something. I don't know. You're right. You're saying after water, it's a little harder. Okay, so you work a little harder, I guess. Yeah, you're right. If it's at a certain level of dampness, then it would be hard. That's a good point. Meaning, maybe we're saying that generally it's not going to validate it, but maybe if it actually seeps into a point where you can't take it off, then yeah, it sounds like it wouldn't validate it. So, okay. So now on the frankincense, Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bar Rav Huna asked Rabbi Yochanan, Nasla Lavona Shechuka. This is more similar to your case, Jules. If you put ground up frankincense on it, Mahu. So do you say that the whole frankincense was very practical because you could remove it? Mishum de Efshar Lalachta, the hollow Efshar. It's too small, it's ground, you can't find all the pieces. So then, Lo Efshar Lalachta, and therefore it would be invalid just like the oil. O Dilma, or maybe you'll say, Mishum de Lo Mivla. At the end of the day, it wasn't absorbed in the flour like oil is. Oil is really absorbed in the flour, it becomes part and parcel of the flour. But Hanami Lo Mivla. This is not fully absorbed in the flour. So that's interesting. According to this, even though you can't remove the whole thing, but since it still remains outside the dough, it doesn't become part and parcel with the dough, right? Usually liquids are absorbent. They become totally part of the thing itself. But dry things don't become part of it. It just remains on the outside. Yeah. A good example for this is okay. So now, which one is it? If you have ground frankincense that gets put into the flour, is that going to invalidate it or not? Is it a practical thing, collecting it, and therefore you can't collect it, so therefore you're good to go? Or is it or do we say no? Oil is the bar. If it's like oil that it's fully absorbent, then it's going to be invalid. But if it's not like oil, then it will not be invalid. So now, Tashma v'levona yilkiteno. It says clearly in a bright you can collect the frankincense. But don't you see from there, it's all about the practical collecting. Dilma chad v'od. No, maybe the price is saying something and then something else, meaning chada dilo mivla. Maybe before that it was saying, listen, you can't, it doesn't get absorbed in the flour, and also yilkiteno. So interestingly enough, even though the Brisa says you can't collect it, but maybe it was saying, first of all, it doesn't get absorbed. And second of all, you could collect it. So if that would be true, so then we don't have a proof to our question. Yeah. Okay. Tashma, another Brisa trying to answer our question. Makshani Balavona, after looked, another Brisa says, I permit this offering, meaning it's not invalid, it's valid offering, because I'm able to collect. I'm able to collect the frankincense. So says the Gemara, same thing over there. Maybe it was saying that first of all, it doesn't get absorbed. Second of all, you could collect it. So then you would not have a proof to our question. Okay. So Mai Havi Allah, what was the conclusion? We have a question and we don't have an answer. Ground up frankincense is going to be invalid or not? Amr of Nachman Bar Yitzchak says Nachman Bar Yitzchak Tanya. Let's bring a brisa. Minchas chote, the sin offering, a flour sin offering. Minchas kinaos, and a sota offering. Shenasan la lavona, that you put frankincense on it. What do? Milakit esalavona ukshera. Remove the frankincense, and then it's going to be valid. Now, what happens if until I removed it, I had some piggle thoughts? What happens over there? So, I had these thoughts. Whether I had a thought outside the right time, outside the right place, it's going to be puzzle. They're both going to be invalid, but ain't bo kares. There's going to be no kares. Even though usually outside the right time there is kares. But here it's invalid, but no kares. Now, once I remove the livona, pigol v'chayavin alav kares. If I remove the frankincense, though, so then I'll be liable. They're both going to be invalid. I'll be liable kares for having the thought outside the right time. So it seems like from here, pretty black and white, that you really have to remove the frankincense. So that was really the conclusion to our question, that you have to remove it. If you don't remove it, you see that there's no kares. It's going to be invalid, but you're not going to have that same stringency because at the end of the day, the frankincense is still here. So we care about the practical removal and not about it being as absorbed as the oil. Now that we mentioned this brisa, so now we have a question. V'tehave pach. The Gemara asks on this brisa that as long as this offering has the frankincense on it, so you should view it like oil fell on it, that it's not fitting. And therefore, we said as long as the frankincense is on it, it's going to be invalid. It won't get kares, but it'll be invalid. We're asking nothing should happen. Why? Because as long as the frankincense is on it, that's like oil being on it. Meaning right now it's invalid. You can't bring it up with the frankincense. And if it's invalid, so then no pigul should take place. Pigul only takes place if it's the only invalidation. But if not, so it's just you're invalidating an already invalid sacrifice. Why don't we say that? Why do your thoughts do anything? It's like having thoughts about an invalid sacrifice. That does nothing. The same way if I have thoughts about my tissue box, so that's not going to do anything. What's not fit to be brought as a sacrifice. So to this, with the frankincense on it, it should also do nothing. So it's rejected. Once it's rejected, who says that your thoughts will do anything? So Amar Abaye, chatas karya rachman. At the end of the day, Abaye says it's still called a chatas. Even while you have the frankincense there, it's still called a chatas. Since it's still called a sin offering, so therefore your thoughts will cause invalidation. Because we haven't fully rejected this. It's still called a chatas. Rava Amar, no, he didn't like this answer. So he says, no, really, it is rejected. But we're going to say the brisa goes like the opinion of Chanan HaMitzri, Chanan the Egyptian. How many Chanan Mitzri who? The less like the He doesn't hold this idea of rejection. Just because it's not fit at one point does not mean it's not fit at all. We look at its potential. Now, right now, it's not fit, but you could take out the frankincense. So now, where did this Chanan Mitzri say what he said? The Tanya Chanan Mitzri Omer Afilu down the coast, maybe Chaveru Shlo B'Hagrala Umezavig Lo. We know we have two he goats on Yom Kippur. So let's say the one that's supposed to be thrown off the cliff gets lost. We don't know where it is. Meanwhile, its counterpart, its friend, that got slaughtered, you have a cup full of blood. So they go together. Now, the one that's supposed to be thrown off the cliff got scared and ran away, and we can't find it anywhere. So now what do? Bring another he-goat to be thrown off the cliff. So now the question is, do you restart the whole process? And you have to get a new shechita and a new cup of blood or not? So Chanan Mitzri says, no. Afilu dam b'kos, maybe chaveru shlo b'hagralav umezaviglo. Bring another he-goat, and you can still use this cup. When the he-goat ran away and got lost, right now, this cup is not fit to be brought because there's no he-goat around. He-goat ran away. So what do you see? That he doesn't hold to the concept of rejection. And even though right now it's not fit, but once you make it fit again, you're good to go. So in our case, even though there's frankincense on the offering, however, it doesn't mean that's going to be invalid because we don't hold this idea of rejection. At least Chanan HaMitzri doesn't. So Rav Ashi Amar. So a third answer. So first, Abai says it's still called the chatas. Rava says it goes like one opinion, Chanan Mitzri. Rav Ashi says no. Even in the world of rejection, but you look at it at its potential. Rav Ashi Amar Kol should be yado. As long as right now you can easily fix it just by taking out the frankincense, that's not called rejection. Right? Like some behaviors are just inexcusable. You have to ask kids to leave the school. There's no way. But otherwise, he can fix it. Just to set him up in the right way. So if you're able to fix it, so then that's not called rejection. Now, Amar Rav Ada says this third answer of Rav Ashi is very logical. I like this answer. Why? Amar Rav Ada calls Rav Ashi Mistabra. It's more logical. The man Sham is like the queen. Who's the opinion that holds of rejection? That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. How do I know that it's not? It says in the Mishnah of Amar Rabbi Yehuda Nafshach Nishpach Adam Yamos HaMishaleach Meis HaMishaleach Yishafech Adam. It says that if the blood got spilled out on Yom Kippur, so then you got to kill the other animal. You got to bring two new animals. The other way, the blood spilled on the ground of the other he-goat that gets slaughtered. Then the one that gets thrown off the cliff, useless for us. So you got to get two new ones. However, if the one getting thrown off the cliff dies, you got to spill out the blood. What do you see? Right? They go together. If the blood spills, the he-goat has to go. If the he-goat gets lost, the blood has to get spilled. You got to start over again. Because at that point, it's no longer fit because your partner's gone. So therefore, you got to start again. So here we see clearly, not like Chanana Mitzri a second ago, that said, no, keep the blood and get a new he-goat. No, you can't keep the blood. So there we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda says that this idea of rejection, right now it's in a state of rejection. So it's out, you have to get a new offering. And there's no way to bring it back. The he-goat's gone, or the he-goat died. You can't revive it. So that's called rejection. Now, at the same time, Rabbi Yehuda says that when you're able to fix it, when it's in your ability to fix it, so then that's not called rejection. And that's why Rav Ada said, I like Rav Ashi's answer to our question. Where do you see that Rabbi Yehuda says that fixing, if you can fix it, it's not called rejected? Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kos Haya Memali Medam Hatarovis, the Zarku, Zrika Achas Knegad Yisod. So this takes place by Erev Pesach. There are a lot of offerings being brought. And what do? There's a lot of blood on the ground of the temple, of the Beis HaMikdash. So you're worried that maybe someone's blood got spilled and it wasn't thrown up properly out of all the offerings. So what do? You take a cup, scoop up the blood, and so therefore someone's blood, everyone's blood, whoever's blood might have spilled is in this cup. It all gets mixed together, it's in this cup, and you take that and throw it on the altar. And that's going to work for an offering that potentially the blood was spilled. Even though it was spilled, being in a state of rejection, you can take a cup, scoop up the blood on the floor, and that will rectify those offerings that the blood was spilled. Why? It's up to your knees. You're walking in blood.
Oh, okay.
So the whole question: how do the pants get dirty?
If it's like that, yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So significant amount of blood there. Yeah. Think twice about applying for a Cohen, right? So you take a cup, but what do you see? Even though it's rejected, you take a cup and you scoop it up and you can put it on because it's in your hand to rectify, and therefore it's not considered rejection. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Okay, fine. So, Tosfos is bothered by an interesting question that we had earlier in Zvachim, that if the altar is damaged at all, so any offerings brought afterwards are going to be are invalid. So the question is why? Why is the altar? You can always fix the altar. It's in your ability to fix. Why should that be considered a rejection? Yeah. Okay. No answer. Fine. So let's keep going. Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Amar Rav Yochanan. Nasan Mashu Shem. Okay, so now we had oil and frankincense. So now, how much oil and how much frankincense is put on that it has to be invalid? So, Nasan Mashu Shem, the tiniest bit of oil, Agabe Kezayis Mincha, on an olive's worth of a flour offering. So, nasan shemen al gabe kazayis, mincha, pasul. That's going to be invalid. A little bit of oil on an olive's worth of flour offering. What's the reason? My timer. Lo yasim. It says by oil you can't place. Placing is even the smallest placing. Any little amount is considered that you placed it. So lo yasim sima koldu. Lo yasim sima koldu. Now, aleha on it. What's on it? On a significant amount, which is what? An olive's worth. Ad ika shiura. Until you have a significant amount, which is an olive's worth. That is the oil. The Amar of Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now it's going to be the inverse by the frankincense. Nasan kizayis levona al gabe mashehu. If you have a kizayis levona, an olive's worth of frankincense, not a little bit, an olive of frankincense, al gabe mashehu, mincha, and you put it on the tiniest measurement of a flour offering. See, the opposite case. Oil was a tiny bit on an olive's worth. Frankincense was an olive's worth on a tiny bit. That's also going to be an invalidation puzzle. Ma'i taimo, what's the reason? It says, lo yitin, you shall not place. Sib. Ad de'ika nesina ala. Placing already requires a certain measurement to be considered a placing. Well, that measurement is an olive's worth. So it depends how the Torah phrases it. If it says you shall not place, placing means only a little bit. If it says you should not put, or nasan, you should really, nasan is to give, shouldn't give. So giving is much more, is a larger amount. It's an olive's worth. Yeah, lo yitin ksiv. Ad de'ika, lo yitin ksiv. Ad de'ika nesina allow. Until you put a placing on it. So now, I got a little stuck on the next line. I didn't really. The Gemara says now, this is have ribui acha ribui, that this is one of these examples. I don't think why, but there's one of these examples that is you're including something after you're including something, and the rule is when you doubly include something, you're really coming to exclude. So have ribui acha ribui. Now, what exactly is the inclusion after the inclusion over here? And it says by oil that you have to place it on it, which is a kizayis, an olive's worth. And by frankincense, it says again, place it on it. It sounds like you have to have an olive's worth. So that's like a double inclusion. So that comes to exclude, I guess, the frankincense from being placed on a olive's worth, rather even placed on something small. It doesn't sound like this is the common case of this rule, but it's interesting. That's interesting. To get that Rashi. Okay, so what is it? Yeah. Yeah, meaning it says by the oil and it says by the frankincense. In both those cases, it says lo yasim aleha, you shall not place on it oil, v'lo yitain aleha, and you shouldn't put on it frankincense. So that is an extra word. You could just say don't put oil, and you could say don't put frankincense. Don't put on it oil on it, and don't put frankincense on it. We know what we're talking about. So the Gemara says that the first one's talking about on it, meaning you have to have a significant amount. You have to have a kazayis. When it says it again, coming to include something, that's an inclusion after an inclusion. An inclusion after inclusion is always an exclusion. So it's coming to exclude, because if you want, I think the logic is that if you want it to be the same as the oil, you could have stayed silent. And you would have thought the same thing as the oil. Put it on it has to be a certain amount. So to the frankincense, unless you're told differently. The fact that it repeats it to include, it means it's coming to exclude that the frankincense does not need to be put on a olive's amount. The olive's amount of frankincense can be put on any little amount of the mincha offering. Okay. Headache on? Good. So, to tell it on the coffee, good. Vika de Amri, Amr of Yitzchak bar Yosef. So some say the following, that Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amr of Yitzchak bar Yosef, he said over that Bayi Rabbi Yochanan inquired the following, Nasan Mashu Shem al Gabi Kazayas, you put a little bit of oil on an olive's worth, Mincha Mahu, what's the halacha? Miba Ina and Sima, Kinasina. When it said placing is like giving, and it has to be giving of an olive's worth, Olo, or not, Teku. So meaning our version said definitively that oil has to be put, a little bit of oil on an olive's worth. Rabbi Yochanan had a question. Do you need a little bit of oil or you need a kazay's worth of oil? How when the Torah switches from do not place to do not give, so is placing the same as giving or it's different? So in this version, it remains unanswered. Nasan shemen al shirah, you put oil on the remnant, the part that's not being brought up on the altar. So that we said is that is not going to be a problem. Where was that? Not in the Mishnah. Yeah, it says that the end of the Mishnah said that you're not violating a negative commandment by putting oil on the remnant, the part that the Kohen eats. So, Taner Rabbanan lo yasim aleh Hashem below yitain. It says you should not place the oil and you should not put the frankincense. Yachol b'shnei kohanim. You would have thought maybe this applies to that if two kohanim, that it just means that the two kohanim won't get an individual set of lashes. Meaning you won't get lashes until you have two kohanim. One puts oil and one puts frankincense. But maybe if one kohen, does it, so then it's not a problem. Meaning, so therefore, below yitin yachol, you would have thought that the verse is referring to two people, b'shnei kohanim. Talmud lomar aleha on it, that we don't care about which kohen does it. The point is aleh begufa shel mincha kasav medaber velo bekohen. We care about that if the oil is placed on the flour offering, then you're going to be liable. Yachol lo yitain kli al gabe kli. You would have thought maybe you can't put a vessel of oil on top of a vessel of flour for the sin offering. V'im nasan pasel. And if you did, then it's going to be invalid. Tamalomar aleha begufa shemincha. Once it says aleha on it, it's only if you put the oil on it and not in a vessel on it. It has to be on it itself. So aleha teaches you that we don't care about how many kohanim do it. If they put oil on the mincha offering, it's going to be invalid. And it has to be on it and not in a vessel on it. Those two things are not going to invalidate. Okay, that concludes that. Now, says the next Mishnah. Some offerings, you have to bring the whole thing up to the altar before you do kmitza. And some of them you don't. Some offerings you waive, and some offerings you don't. So, same format as 2 Mishnayos ago. It says, Yesh tunos hagasha v'entinos tenufa. Some require bringing up to the altar, but don't require waving. Hagasha v'tenufa. Some require both bringing up and waving. Tenufa v'lo hagasha, lo tenufa v'lo hagasha. Some require waving and not bringing up, and some require lo tenufa v'lo hagasha. It doesn't need either. Which is which? Ve'elu tunos hagasha v'entinos tenufa. A whole long list, just like we had 2 Mishnayos ago. That the ones that require bringing up and do not require waving are as follows: minchas asolas, a fine flour offering, the hamakabas, and a thinner frying pan, umarcheshes, a deeper frying pan, the hachalos. You want to voluntarily offer a baked flour offering, so you got to bring 10 chalos, or you could bring the harakikin, 10 wafers, not loaves. Minchas kohanim, the voluntary kohen offering of minchas kohen Mashiach, or the daily offering brought by the Kohen Gadol. Those all need to bring up to the altar and do not require waving. Minchas nachrim. Interesting, here it changes the word. Before we had the mincha, it says Oved Kochavim, an idol worshiper referring to a non-Jew. Here it switches it to a non-Jew. Minchas nachrim. So minchas nashim, or the flour offering of a woman, or minchas chota, or the flour offering of a sinner. Now, we mentioned this earlier in the Gemara, and now we're going to speak it out. Rabbi Shimon Omer, minchas kohanim, or minchas kohen Mashiach, ein behen. Sorry, this part we didn't speak out. Rabbi Shimon argues and says, minchas kohanim, or minchas kohen Mashiach, the voluntary offering of the Kohen, and the Kohen Gadol's offering, ein behen magasha. Lefish ein behen kmitza. There's no need to bring it up to the altar because there's no kmitza by these offerings. The kol shein behen kmitza, ein behen hagasha. Anytime there's no kmitza, there's no scooping up, there is no hagasha bringing up either. Now, this we had earlier. Amar of Papa, whenever we list these group of flour offerings, we always list 10 of them. Why? Because we said earlier, if you want to bring a voluntary baked flour offering, so there's a debate. What could you bring? 2 options or 3 options? You can either bring 10 loaves or 10 wafers. That's one opinion. Rabbi Shimon holds, though, you have a third opinion, 5 and 5. So when we list, we always list 10 and not 11, coming to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So, Kol Hecha D'Tanan, Eser Tanan. For what reason? Mike Mashmalan, La'afu came with Rabbi Shimon to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. What did he hold? The Amar Mekza Chalos and Mekza Rikin Yavi Kamashman Delo. He holds you could bring, when you want to bring a voluntary mincha, baked offering, you could bring half of them could be loaves and half of them could be wafers. So our Mishnah lists only 10 offerings to exclude that 11th offering. Okay. Minna Hanimili. How do I know that things require waving or bring up and not waving? It says, the Tanur Rabban, the Brisa says, Ilu Namar, if it would have said, when it was talking about the flour offerings, the Hevesa Asher Yasa, if it just would have said, if it Hevesa Es Asher Ye'aseh Me'eleh Hashem, that the ones that are brought are the ones that are just for Hashem. V'hi kriva ela Kohen, you should bring it to the Kohen. V'hi gisha, and you should bring it up. If the verse would have just said that, now the verse, our Gemara skips a few words in the verse because it's our verse says V'hi ela Kohen. You should bring the mincha. So our Gemara says if it just said you should bring that which will be brought to Hashem, and it doesn't say as ha mincha. If you took out that word, it just would have said that. Hayisi Omer, I would have said ein li shaton agasha ela kometz bilvad. It's only the things that require kmitza would need to be brought to the altar, because if you took out ha mincha, the verse read whatever's brought up to Hashem, that's only the kmitza is put on the altar. So only that which is put on the altar, which means only something which requires kmitza, needs to be brought up to the altar. Mincha minayin, a regular mincha offering which does not have kmitza. How do I know that that's also something which has to be brought up to the altar? Talmud Lomer mincha. It says the word mincha. That word mincha teaches that mincha offerings, even ones that don't need kmitza, still need to be brought to the altar. Minchas chote minayin. Okay, the sin offering of a chote. How do you know that that's included? Talmud Lomer es ha mincha. It says es ha mincha from the mincha. Sounds like it includes all the mincha offerings need to be brought up to the altar. Just because there's no kmitza, or because you're fully consumed on the altar, doesn't matter. All the minchas are going to be included and being brought up and having a necessity to be brought up to the altar. Now, why do I need a verse to teach me this? I could have learned that logically. Why? Namar hacha, it says, by the flour offerings, it says, Namar hacha, next page, minchas chova, by an obligatory mincha offering, Namar hacha, minchas nedava. It says by the, that you have to, in both a obligatory offering and a voluntary offering, it says, it compares them. The verse that says you have to bring it up is by a minchas nedava. So you should learn out a minchas chova, an obligatory mincha offering, from a voluntary mincha offering. So therefore, minchas chota should be learned out. An obligatory sin offering should be learned out from a voluntary offering, and therefore you don't need a verse to teach me that. So ma minchas nedava tuna hagasha, af minchas chota chova to nagasha. Just like a voluntary mincha offering needs to be brought up to the altar, brought close, not brought up on the altar, but brought to the altar. So too an obligatory offering should be the same thing. What should be the difference? And therefore, why do you have to have a verse? Just learn it from there. So no, a voluntary mincha offering requires oil and frankincense. So it's unique. So mincha sota tochiach, a mincha sota will prove to you that doesn't matter. A mincha sota doesn't have any oil and frankincense, and yet it gets brought up to the altar. Okay, but there we say mal mincha sota shekain tuna tenufa. That you have waving. Okay, but maybe only something that has waving has to be brought to the altar. That we say minchas and davat tochiach. The voluntary offering doesn't have waving, and it still has to be brought up on the altar. So says the Gemara, what do you have? V'chazor adin. It's going to go in a circle. Lo reizeh v'kerzev lo reizeh. Each one has something which is not similar. However, they all have in common that there's a kmitza and there's bring up onto the altar. The minchas chota, the sin offering of a chota, is equal to them and has a similarity like they do, that it also requires kmitza. So therefore, to shava lahen la'agasha, it should also be brought up on the altar, and you don't need a special verse. It can be learned from a tzad shava. Says the Gemara, no, we're going to reject the whole tzad shava. Mala tzad shava shaban. What the tzad shava shaban? Shekin huksharu lavo ba'ashir kibani. Those offerings, the voluntary offering and the sota offering, it's the same if you're poor or rich. By the flour offering of a sinner, there's a whole variation of what offerings you bring if you're rich or if you're poor. So therefore, those are not that's a non-similarity. That's something which is dissimilar to this, and therefore you cannot include it. Talmud lomar esa mincha. That's why you need a verse esa mincha to teach you that a mincha schota, the sin offering, a flour sin offering, is also something which requires to be brought up to the altar, and you would not be able to learn it out through a tzad hashava shabbat.